I wanted to show you something that you're probably not going to be worried about for your final, your character final, what someone asked about, and I think it's something you should know kind of going forward as you work on stuff and do things in ZBrush. Sooner or later, you're going to be confronted with the idea that you're going to want to use something that you made in ZBrush in another program, but that program is not going to be able to handle the kind of insane number of polygons and the massive geometry that you can throw around in ZBrush. So I wanted to show you how you deal with that, and I want to show you how to take something from ZBrush into Maya and apply a map to it there that's going to let you use, this is basically the conundrum here. How do you get something that looks like this in Maya, for instance, to look like this in Maya? Okay, so you can see I've got a bunch of different levels, a bunch of different subdivision levels here. And I added just some noise here on his face. I stuck an IMM meshy thing on here, this kind of scale looking thing. And basically I just put some like streaks and some little cuts and dribs and drabs and just some essentially some high res detail. So we could see how you could get this kind of look when you render in Maya, but actually when you actually look at the model in Maya, it's going to look like this. Okay, so the way you do that is with a displacement map. Okay, you'll see in games they'll use normal maps, which is a kind of a similar kind of a thing, but a displacement map is actually going to move the geometry when it renders. Okay, so it's going to add detail here and things like that. So you can see what you're actually going to be getting in a very efficient way. But it also then allows you to work at this really low level. You can see I've got basically 10,000 points here, but of 2.5 million points at the high level of detail. Okay? All right, so the way you do this is, for starters, you need to have a UV map for your guy, okay, which I did already in here, and I'll probably do another little video to show you how I did that, how you do that in ZBrush. It's stupidly fast, easy, and efficient in ZBrush. And when you export a model from ZBrush, you're going to export it as an OBJ file, which is .obj. It was basically a file format made by the people who now make Maya, but it was Wavefront at the time. OBJ, and it's basically a format that you can interchange with pretty much any other 3D program. Okay, so very, very common format. The cool thing though is the UVs you make stick with that format. So if you make them in ZBrush, they will transfer into Maya automatically without you having to do anything special dealing with it. Okay, so a couple things I'm going to do first. I'm going to click on export here, and I'm going to turn off this group button. This is just in case you have multiple groups, polygroups in here, and you'll see I don't. I made all this stuff purple by just hitting Control W, which basically turns everything the same polygroup. But initially the IMMs I did were a separate polygroup, the teeth were a separate polygroup, the eyes were a separate polygroup. All that stuff was different, okay? So I wanted to make sure it was all one, but this will do the same thing. It would basically take all of that stuff and turn it into one polygroup. Now, if you have separate subtools, you would have to merge this thing or export them separately, okay? Displacement maps don't cross subtools, okay? So you're going to have to do one for each if you're going to go that way. Okay, so anyway, you go to Z plugin over here, and I'm going to go to a multi-map exporter right here, okay? And what this does, or what this is a way that you can create texture maps or any kind of maps really. So you can have like a texture map from your poly paint if you're going to render something in Maya, for instance, and you want to get it out of ZBrush with your colors and stuff intact. An AO map, a cavity map, a normal map. Here we're just going to focus on displacement, okay, just this displacement version right here. And we're going to also click Export Mesh, okay? And what it'll do is it's going to use whatever mesh you have at your, on screen essentially. And in here, I've got this at level 1, okay? So again, I can go to level 2, I could export that, 3, 4, 5, which would be sort of pointless because that has a 2.5 million polys. So I'm going to leave it at 1. Okay, sometimes you might want to go to 2 so you could get some of this stuff softening, because displacement maps will only be able to take you so far. They'll do really good with tiny little details like this, but sometimes really gross changes like that, they will have a little bit more of a difficulty with. For whatever reason, it's probably just something I'm missing. But I'll leave it at 1 so you can see the really lowest end here of how you can make this thing happen. Okay, so I'm going to go to Z plugin again, displacement, and I'm going to set a couple things. You need to have this flip V turned on. Okay, that makes sure that when you bring it into Maya, it's going to fit right, because ZBrush does everything upside down. Okay, so you want to flip this. This is the map size, and that's basically based on your UV map. And I've set it to 4096, the highest res here, you know, just to see how it would look. No, doesn't really matter a whole lot. This is going to come out as a 16-bit TIFF file, or a Photoshop file, I should say. This map border, I think the default is 4. I'm going to change that to 16. It just makes a bigger border around the UVs. It leaves a little space on the edges. So that's just in pixels, I believe. 4096, it's going to be super tiny, but that's okay. We're just going to leave that. And then you need to check export options down here, because this is going to give you all the different options you have for the different maps you have going on. Okay, so I'm going to click on displacement map, and see I've got this set to subdiv level 2. I'm going to turn that back down to 1. So you can control this here. This is going to, you know, pull whichever subdivision level you specify there, and that's what it's going to export for the mesh. Okay. So like I said, I'm going to just do it at the lowest level here because I want it to really low level in Maya. Okay, this I'm going to turn down to 0. I had it set earlier for an experiment. I will sweat that. And this get scale has something to do with the scale of this versus the scale of your map and the scale of your actual displacements. So I'm going to click that. Okay, and it's going to do some calculations here. It's just going to throw a number in there on the slider. As you can see here, it changed the scale of this to 17 and this to 0.0682. I don't actually know exactly what that does. All I know is it seems to work for me. And I'm going to click this 16-bit scale button. Okay, so that's kind of all you have to do. And then you click Create All Maps. Okay, like this. It's going to ask you where do you want to save this stuff. I'll just do a new folder here. Goblin 4. So click in there. And it's just making them, it's telling you what. So 15 seconds. Okay, super fast, no big deal, no great whoop to deal with that. Okay, and I'm just going to shut this down. I'm not going to save it because I don't care. Okay, then I'm going to go back to Maya, or over to Maya. Okay, and I just loaded that old scene we have with our the ray gun, the Arnold kind of scene here with the 3 area lights and the cove setup. And I'm going to go to File, Import. And I'm going to find my, and I think this is fine, I'll just use this one, this Goblin Head OBJ. That's what it exported. Okay, just going to click OK here. Okay, here he is. Tiny, tiny, tiny. I'm going to make this bigger. I want this to be a little bit bigger. I don't know how big. Let's see how that looks. That's too big. I would knock that down to maybe 20. That looks fine. Okay. I'll just kind of pop that in here, and I'm just going to do a render view here. See what that looks like. Okay. Doesn't look like much, which is fine. Okay, so I'm going to assign a new material here, and I'm just going to do an AI standard surface, as we're used to. Okay, and this is really the only tricky part, because you would think if it was like a bump map or something like that, you'd be sticking it in the geometry channel. Displacements occur at render time. Of course, these things do too, but every time you make a surface in Maya, what comes along with it to tell the renderer what to do is a shading group. Okay, so if you click this little arrow here, you can see I've got this SG tagged on the end of the name of my standard surface there. Okay, again, clicking this little guy, boop, takes you that direction. So that is what we're going to be putting the displacement map in. I'm just going to make this a little softer shading wise, okay, like so, and click on this, okay. So you see surface material, that's the surface we put on it. Volume material, don't need to worry about that. Displacement material, that is the one we want. So we click on the checkerboard to put a render node in, click on File, as usual. See what happened? Nothing interesting, or nothing good, I should say. We haven't assigned it yet, so we're going to click on this little arrow right here. Under image name, we click on the folder and we find the file. Okay, and this is our PSD file, like so. Not a whole lot has happened yet, okay, but it is in there now. And I'm going to turn filter off. That actually is a blurring factor, so I don't really want anything blurry. Okay, you can kind of see something has happened there a little bit. Okay, so then the next thing you have to do once you've got that in your scene is you click on the file itself, or the object itself, and you go to the shape node for the object. Okay, and under Arnold, here I'll just close these all up so you don't have to look at anything else. So under Arnold, remember this is where you would maybe put in change something to a mesh light or something like that. There's a tab down here called Subdivision, and under that displacement. Okay, so for Subdivision we're going to choose Catmull Clark. Okay, and that's really just going to smooth the model. Okay, iterations is how many times it's going to smooth it. I'm going to set that to 2. Okay, like so. And down here I have height. Okay, that's the height of the bump, or not the bump, the displacement. And then we have an auto bump thing here, which actually just adds a bump map to it automatically, which is kind of cool. But you can kind of see already, if you take a look here at what I have, there's that kind of stuff on the front of his upper lip here. Okay, we kind of move through here like this. You can see these are some of those little ridges I put in on his face. Okay, now you'll see how angular this is. Really all I need to do is hit the 3 key on this guy, like so, and that's going to take care of that. Okay, so the displacement map is really dealing with iterations of the displacement map, not so much the actual pre-smoothing the preview smoothing that you will get when you work in Arnold by hitting the 3 key. Okay, but you can see what we've got here. Okay, and if I look at the little bracelet-y stuff in here, all of a sudden you can see what I've got in terms of detail here. Okay, and all of this is shooting at, whatever that was, 7,000 or 8,000 points, polygons. There's no way you should be able to get this kind of detail, and you wouldn't unless you put that displacement map in. Okay, so that is the kind of the secret weapon of dealing with stuff from ZBrush that you have at a super high resolution and making it look that way in another program without worrying about all of that detail you might have to suffer through in terms of the number of polygons you would be using if you're actually trying to do it inside a ZBrush. Okay, and you can see it's just pretty remarkable, how quickly you can get that thing to work. Okay, and again, even if I turn this mesh down with 1 here, it doesn't look half bad. Okay, now the other interesting thing you can do here is there's a height factor, okay, in the displacement attributes. So you actually do have some degree of control over that as well. So for instance, let's say I want to take a look in here at these kind of the wrinkly things I stuck on his eyes and around his eye here. And I change this to say 2, okay? You can see that actually does increase the range between those two, the highs and the lows. So displacement map is really a grayscale map. In this case, it's a 16-bit grayscale, so you have a little extra information there than a typical 8-bit grayscale. But what you're looking at is black being low, nothing going on, white being high, the maximum displacement, and then everything gray in between is going to transition between those two. Okay? So again, bumping that up gives me a little more of a dramatic feel for that. See, it made his upper lip a bit extreme, but you kind of get the idea here, what we're looking at. Okay. So I'd probably go somewhere. I wouldn't ever go that much, but maybe 1.3, something like that might be an interesting, in between. If I just wanted to tweak it a bit more, something like that might be good to do. Okay, so main points are you need UV maps, and I'll do a vid on that, getting UV maps out of ZBrush. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It won't even generate the maps for you. You do the settings, and you can just freeze the video, from wherever that was in here. So you can get those from the video, and then you export your maps. You bring it into Maya, and you apply that displacement map in the shader group of the particular shader that you assign to the object itself. Okay? Hit the 3 key to smooth it. Go to the object itself, the shape node of the object in the attribute editor. Go to the Arnold area, subdivision, displacement attributes, and do these settings as well. And you can take these iterations up higher if you want. That's just going to smooth things out a bit more. Okay, your displacement itself. So that's the basic deal. It takes a little tweaking to get the first few times you do it, but it's pretty amazing. Plus, it lets you work fast in Maya with all the detail that you originally had in ZBrush when you render. And that's pretty freaking awesome. Okay, that's it. Stay tuned for the UV map. Fun of unwrapping in ZBrush. All right, later.